everyone. We're going to get started in 1 second. Sorry for the few-minute delay. Let's see. Just waiting for Kaitlyn. Oh, there you are, Kaitlyn.
Hi. How are you?
Hi. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk with everybody tonight.
I know.
Coming in into our virtual room, I guess.
I know. It's this is only my second or third time doing this, so it's still a new experience, but I'll give folks a few more minutes and then I'll kick things off.
Oh, great.
I'll showcase your beautiful book while we're waiting. It's just so stunning. The colors, I think, it's just the greens and the blues and the profile of Libertie. All right, well, by way of introduction, I want to introduce myself and our guest author tonight. My name is Nancy Brown. I'm one of the co-founders of Bookclubs. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Bookclubs, we are a web and mobile app that makes organizing a book club super simple. We also partner with publishers and authors to offer reading inspiration to our community of book clubs. And every month we sit down with one of our authors. And tonight I'm joined with and joined by Kaitlyn Greenidge, who is the author of Libertie. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to discover this book or come across this book either on an Instagram feed or in your local bookstore, it is a thing of beauty. So thank you, Kaitlyn, for being with us tonight.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about it with you guys.
Awesome. Well, on the back of the book, as part of the description and promo, Jacqueline Woodson says that you are a master storyteller, and I think she nailed it. And that, as I was sharing with you before we hopped on here, the characters and the writing, I can't get it out of my head. I finished the book on Tuesday, and I can't find myself to pick up a new book because the storytelling was so masterful and so lyrical, and the characters so vibrant. So I'm sure if anyone's joining us tonight, they're familiar with Libertie, or they will be very soon. But I would love if you could just kick it off by sharing what is Libertie about.
Sure. So Libertie is based on the life of Dr. Susan Smith McKinney Stewart. She's the first Black female doctor in New York State. And she had a daughter named Anna who married the son of the Episcopal Archbishop of Haiti, and moved to Haiti. The marriage fell apart, and during her time there, she was writing letters back to her mother saying, this marriage is bad, I need to get out. Her mother eventually helped her sort of escape the marriage, but all this was happening in the early 1900s. So when she left Haiti, when the doctor's daughter left Haiti, she was managed to get back to New Jersey. She settled in the U.S. She never reconciled with her husband. She never remarried. She raised her children. For the rest of her life, she sort of told her children and grandchildren about how much she loved the country of Haiti and living there. But also for the rest of her life, she would get letters from her estranged in-laws sort of saying, come back here. You have ruined this marriage. Not only have you ruined this marriage, but you've also brought shame to sort of the entire project of Black freedom and Black liberation that we were trying to achieve in Haiti. And so they sort of put the future and the survival of Black people in America and in the diaspora on this one woman's shoulders in this sort of one marriage. And so I interviewed her descendant, soap opera actress named Ellen Hawley, about 10 years ago for an oral history project that I was doing for this place called the Weeksville Heritage Center. So Weeksville is a museum in Brooklyn that's dedicated to the history of this free Black community that was founded in the 1830s in Brooklyn, where Dr. Susan Smith McKinney Stewart and her daughter grew up, and their ancestor, the doctor's father, founded that community. So I was doing this oral history project for them of researching descendants of people who had lived there. I talked to Ellen Hawley, who was one of them. She told me this extraordinary story about Anna and her mother, the doctor, and she herself has written about it in her autobiography, which is still in print, called One Life, which I highly recommend to people if they want to read it, because she's a really fantastic historian, genealogist. And I thought to myself when I first heard that story, you know, if I ever get a chance to write a novel, I'd love to write a novel about this. And so I started writing this novel about like 3 years ago. And as I was writing, I sort of changed the time period. I set it during Reconstruction, not in the 1900s. And I changed some details about the mother and daughter's lives. But that was the original inspiration story.
Wow. I'm curious how much, basing it off of history and a piece of historical fiction, how intense was the research aspect of the writing?
Research was pretty intense, but I tried to make it really focused. So I tried to sort of outline what I thought the plot was going to be before I started researching, knowing that the things would change as stuff came up. But really, like a really sort of bare bones plot and movement to understand what things I was actually going to be sort of targeting as I researched. So, for example, I knew that I wanted to have Libertie arrive in Haiti after her marriage. And I knew that I wanted her to arrive there in a really specific time in Haitian history. So she's coming there in the late 1870s, about 10 years after Haiti had started this program encouraging specifically Black Americans to move there to get lots of land, and basically trying to undermine the slave system in the U.S. To say we're going to be a free space for Black people to move to. So Libertie is coming there really specifically like 10 years after that program has started, and is sort of seeing the fruits of that and the complications of that. And that was really important. So something like that really helped narrow down the research to say, okay, I don't have to know all of Haitian history up to this point or all of Haitian history after. I'm just focusing on like this 5-year period. And that helped me sort of narrow down what I need to know.
That makes sense. Well, I want to get back to Haiti because I'm curious a little bit about that. But I'll start by asking, how are you doing? The book has been out in the world now a little over 2 months, and I'm always curious for an author, how does your relationship change pre and post publication? After you're getting to engage with the readers and hear how they're falling in love with Libertie or any other aspect of the story. And I'm curious how your relationship has changed to the book pre and post publication.
That's a great question. I think my relationship feels kind of the same in that, like, when I was writing it, I just sort of really was so curious to see the reception of what it would be and how people would react to it and how readers would react to it. And it's been so heartening to see people really dive into it and really want to be sort of within that world completely. Like, that's so exciting for a writer to hear, and especially when I'm trying to build a world from scratch, because it's a culture and a country that I'm not necessarily a part of, and also it's set in the past.
Right.
So the invitation to sort of envelop a reader it feels more daunting to start to put that together. So to hear from people that they feel like they're in that world is like the best thing to sort of hear on this tour.
Yeah, I bet it has to be so rewarding and fun to hear reverberate it back to you, people's impressions and how they're connecting to it. So I know you're in the thick of things in your tour, but I imagine it's fun and rewarding, as you said.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it is.
Okay, so the book starts off on a really, really powerful note. And this is not a spoiler for those of you who haven't read Libertie, but Libertie, the daughter, has witnessed, or she thinks she has witnessed, her mother, who is a doctor, resurrect a man from the dead.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this hits on two really central themes of the novel, and that is this mother-daughter relationship, the idolization that happens at a young age, and how that kind of transforms as Libertie grows into her own woman, and kind of hostility grows to her with her mother, and then there's this other thread of rebirth. But I want to start with that first piece about the mother-daughter relationship, because that was a really powerful one here, and
Yeah.
it was the relationship I found myself rooting for the most, and like, I want this to heal, I want this to be right. And then I came across an article that you wrote in the New York Times last year called Impersonating Motherhood. And you reference Toni Morrison in that article, and how she believes there is a freedom to be had in motherhood. So I don't know if you were a mother when you wrote Libertie, or at what stage of motherhood you were in, but I'm curious how that has how it impacted your characters, and how these characters now impact and redefine your relationship to motherhood.
I wasn't a mother when I was writing most of the first draft, and when I was in the second draft, and then when I was finally doing sort of like last minute edits and stuff, my daughter was about 6 months, or maybe like 9 months old. So very new to motherhood, and so the actual experience of like my personal experience of motherhood is not really in the book. It was really
Okay.
sort of like thinking about what motherhood means, and how people talk about it, and how different writers and artists have tried to describe it. I think it's so interesting, because I think motherhood is this subject that everyone who becomes a mother sort of acts like it's brand new, but like we have in our culture a lot of books and memoirs and fiction as well, exploring motherhood, but because it's usually coming from women identified people, or people who read as women,
Right.
we don't necessarily listen to that experience a lot until people are actually sort of like in the midst of it, and then people want to sort of hear about it, especially motherhood. I think of like, all stages of it. I think we tend not to really listen to people talking about what it is, and so I was really struck by that dichotomy. Even before I had my own kid, I was sort of struck by that, and I was really drawn to reading from the artists and writers and thinkers who didn't see necessarily motherhood as in competition with their larger ambition around work. Mm-hmm. So like Toni Morrison is super interesting, because she talks pretty frankly about how important it was for her to be a mother, and how conceptually she didn't see it as in competition with her artistic life at all, and in fact sort of saw it feeding into that. There's Sarah Ruhl, who's a playwright. She has a really wonderful book called 100 Essays I Didn't Have Time to Write, and she didn't have time to write them because she wrote them when she had like very young twins. And it's a great book. I highly recommend it. It's really fun to read. It's like a craft writing book. If you're a writer, it's really fun to read. Even if you're not a writer, it's just interesting. Yeah. The essays are literally only 100 words long, because she didn't have time to write them. And except for like the last one, which is very long, and it goes into a larger explanation about how she had these twins, and she had an extremely physically challenging pregnancy and birth, and afterwards she had her twins, she developed Bell's palsy, and so she writes through this whole thing of like how much motherhood interrupted her physical life, but how much she as an artist, she's a super famous playwright, and on Broadway and all this other stuff, and how she as an artist ultimately doesn't really see like that as an interruption into her work or life as an artist, and that life is a part of being an artist. You can't separate the two. In fact, they're going to feed into each other, and that's where your life's work is. So this is a long-winded way to say, like, I my own motherhood experience isn't in the book, but that idea and that ideal, that other way of thinking about motherhood and ambition outside of sort of like they're always going to be at odds, and right. There is no work-life balance, or work-life balance is the wrong word, but there's what's that, can a woman have it all, like those kind of like really unhelpful questions when like the question is really more like, how do you, you know, prime yourself to integrate all of your experiences with motherhood with your experiences of your wider self, and sort of make that a holistic life, and they're sort of all part of your understanding of yourself.
Yeah, that's really beautifully put. And I was, while you were chatting, I was rummaging through the pages because they're that's really interesting that I didn't realize that you hadn't experienced motherhood for yourself when you're writing this, because there's this one line when Libertie's mother is writing her letter. She's moved to Haiti, and she has this very vulnerable moment, and I think she describes in this one sentence what, to me, I'm not a mother, but a little bit of what motherhood might feel like. And she says, I decided when you were born, she's speaking to Libertie, that I would hide my heart from you because I worried I would love you into nervous oblivion. I don't know, that just really, really stuck with me.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I think that's sort of like obsessive interest in each other that comes especially with like a single parent relationship with a child. Like I was raised by a single mother, so like that sort of intense understanding of each other to the point where like you can sort of feel like we are in each other's pockets like too much was really a thing that I sort of wanted to explore, because I think sometimes like that's a give and take relationship over the course of sort of a life, and it's a really interesting dynamic to sort of see go back and forth like that.
Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so the other central theme that I think runs through this novel is this idea of rebirth, identity, and changing your identity and how it relates to freedom. And so another character in this book is Ella, who is Libertie's husband's sister, so her sister-in-law. And this is when they're in Haiti, and Ella has been labeled by her family and community, wider community, as mad. She's a crazy woman. And there's this line also that has really stuck with me. She tells Libertie, the world thinks you're mad. It's the greatest freedom I've ever known. And I wrote in the text of my book, you know, maybe madness is freedom in the sense that living under others' expectations is utter confinement. So there's so many different ways to define freedom throughout this book, and whether it relates to rebirth, identity, what have you. And so maybe this is a tough question, but I'm curious, how do you define freedom? And what do you think it means to be truly free?
Like I think that's
it's a tough one. So not a softball question.
Yeah, no, this is great. Like it's the main question of the novel, and I think it's so dependent on one's like positionality and one's relationship to others. Like I think oftentimes, especially in US culture, we think of freedom as like a very individualistic enterprise. And to me, I'm sort of more interested in the tension between like personal freedoms and larger and what you owe or don't owe to a larger community. And I think those two things are in fact like hand in hand. Like I don't think you can get to a true version of freedom without understanding how it's affecting, interacting with, holding space for the other communities that you are in conversation with. But I do think that there's also sort of like this idea of freedom of like breaking through. You know, as we're talking, I'm sort of thinking of this idea. I don't know who said it, but I think it's like some older Black writer who I was talking with. I can't remember who said it at this time, but it was maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, and sort of talking to elder writer about sort of like what you feel like as a writer, as a Black writer, so as a writer for a marginalized community, what you feel like you have freedom to write about. And they sort of said like you have the freedom to write about everything, but that doesn't mean you write about everything. Like that freedom is very weighted and comes with, you know, that old adage, like it comes with responsibility. It comes with making sort of like real choices that have real consequences. And so just because you can artistically do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should, or that then that absolves you from harm, or that absolves you from criticism. And so I think sometimes when we get into sort of conversations about, especially around like artistic freedom, the idea that you can sort of make whatever you want is wonderful, but the idea that then that is that freedom should be divorced from pain or harm or garnering criticism from outside sources, I think is sort of when we have to decouple, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And I think it's a complicated thing. Like most, you know, it's not, there isn't one definition of it. And it's, and that's very illustrated throughout this novel, which was fun to see, and powerful. So there is this one part in the earlier, going back to the beginning of the novel, and this is, I kind of see the novel as in three, if we look at it geographically. Libertie is born in Brooklyn, she goes to Ohio, and then she goes to Haiti. And so this is when she's in Ohio, and she's at college, Cunningham College, I believe. And she, or actually, no, excuse me, this is actually when she's still in Brooklyn, and her mother is part of the Ladies Intelligence Society.
Yes.
And I think I loved reading about that because I see just really strong parallels between that and book clubs that exist today, where it's groups of women that are leaning on each other, challenging each other, showing up for each other. And I'm curious, was that a real, based on a real thing, for lack of a better word? Was that a...
Yeah, it's based on two real things. So Weeksville,
Okay.
the free Black community that Dr. Susan Smith McKinney-Stewart grew up in, had in their newspapers and in sort of their archives, there's reference to something called the Female Intelligence Agency that was founded by women who lived in the community. There's no records, or known records of it, I should say, or archives of it, or sort of what they were doing, but knowing sort of the history of mutual aid groups in Black communities at that time, that's probably what it was. And then the specific descriptions of sort of like what their meetings were, there's been a whole bunch of research done around this Black abolitionist in Philadelphia named Sarah Mapps Douglas, who she was a Black abolitionist. She was born free. She actually had to sort of have a political awakening to become an abolitionist, which is super interesting. She didn't necessarily think slavery had anything to do with her, even though she was this free Black woman in Philadelphia, because the Black, whatever. She didn't really understand it. And then she sort of had a political education. And the way she got that political education is that these women's groups would be politically organizing around abolition. And then at the end of the group, they would always have these sort of like book club interactions where they would write each other poetry and read it and then critique it. And it was like one of the very earliest book clubs, one of the very earliest like community writing groups. But they didn't think of it that way, but that's what it was.
Yeah.
They would write these poems to each other, and then they'd read them to each other, and then they'd critique them. And then they would also make these friendship albums where they would bring them to each other's houses. And now historians use that to sort of track the genealogy and understand how all those families were interacting with each other. But in the 1830s and 40s, they would make these really beautiful, intricate friendship albums and be sort of pressing flowers back and forth, both writing in it, and then people in their community who couldn't write would put sort of like objects in it. And it was a way to sort of strengthen your community bond. So
yeah. No, I loved that part, and learning about how these women were supporting each other. And that reminds me, I don't know if you caught this, but there was a really great article in the Washington Post, maybe a month ago, maybe less, about the history of book clubs. And
oh wow,
and maybe the journalist, I think her name's Jess McHugh. Anyways, just how it, you know, was political force and a force for good, and a force for connection and community. And so So I loved, obviously, reading about that and how that was in your novel. And it begs the question, have you been in a book club, Kaitlyn? And I don't know, as a writer, maybe it's a writer's group, but I'm always curious how book club impacts authors, and your relationship to book club.
I would love to be in a book club. I'm never able to read stuff on time to be able to attend. I love book clubs. I love study groups. I've sort of been involved in things where we tried to do sort of like reading articles to try and make it more manageable, but then people are always picking like 50-page long articles, so I never get through them. But I do love book clubs and sort of writing groups, and definitely sharing writing and writing groups have been like a really important part of my life. I spent a long time working with a group in New York City called the New York Writers Coalition. That's really wonderful. If anybody is in New York listening, you should check them out. They run writing groups across the 5 boroughs for free in communities that normally don't have writing groups. So they run them on Rikers Island. They run them in community centers. I ran one at Arab American Family Center for a long time with like 6 and 7-year-old kids who just come from Yemen. About like 5 or 6 years ago, that was really fun. That was like 6-year-olds. Some of them spoke English, some of them did not, like trying to come up with writing exercises for them. They also do like a free one in the park in the summertime for kids, which I also used to run. So that kind of like interaction around stuff and group writing together is really close to me and close to my sort of understanding about writing, for sure.
Yeah. No, something that's reflected back to us and our community is that there are so many ways to quote unquote book club. It doesn't have to necessarily be reading a novel together. It's kind of like the Ladies Intelligence Society. It's at the core, it's about showing up for one another and challenging each other. And so it sounds like you've had experience with that, which is great.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so we do this thing where we like to end these interviews with just some fun questions to get to know you as an author, but also as Kaitlyn, the mother, the reader, the friend. So they don't require much thought, just what comes to your mind.
Okay.
I want to know, what is currently on your nightstand?
I'm reading Andrea Lee wrote a novel called Red Island House that came out this month. That's really fantastic.
Ooh, I haven't heard of this. Okay.
Yeah, it's about a woman. She's she's Black American. She's born in Oakland. She marries this Italian guy, and he owns a vacation home in island off the coast of Madagascar. And she gets there, and he's built the house with sort of as a surprise for her. And she gets there as sort of, it's like this fairy tale opening. She gets there, and they realize that the house manager he's hired has sort of like bewitched the property. And the people in town come up to her and they say, your husband built this house all wrong. He was supposed to sort of like sacrifice these goats. He didn't do it because he was too cheap. This guy came in and is like using evil magic against you. This place is cursed. You gotta lift the curse yourself. That's how the novel opens. And then the rest of the book is about her doing this sort of like figuring out and navigating being in this place, and it's really interesting. It's about a culture completely new to me. I don't know anything. I love Madagascar, always been fascinated by it. Don't know anything about the culture, just mostly interested in sort of like the biology of it, because it's just like such interesting animals and stuff there. So it's just really fascinating. It's great to read as we ease into summer because it feels like vacation. You're just sort of like completely other world. So that's really fun to read.
Cool. Okay. The Island House.
Yes. Red Island House. Red Island House. Yeah.
Red Island House. Oh, yeah. Good. Awesome. Okay. Where are you traveling next? When it's safe to do so and you can.
Fingers crossed, we are going to Martha's Vineyards at some point this summer. So my family, we usually go for a few weeks because my cousin has a house there that she vacation rental that she has there. And even before pandemic, she didn't like renting to people she didn't know. So we're like her only renters.
Nice. That's a good assignment.
I'm fingers crossed we get to go there. I'm really excited to check it out and to because we obviously didn't get to go last summer. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I have to say this book made me want to go to Haiti.
Yes. Yeah.
Had you been to Haiti before? Like, have you been to Haiti? I guess
I have been. I went for
Okay.
research. So I went in 2018, in February 2018, I went for a really brief research trip. It was about like 5 or 6 days. And I went to Port-au-Prince and Jacmel. So I didn't get to the northern side of the island. So I really want to go check out that side of the island, or the country rather. But I really loved Jacmel. Originally, I was like trying to figure out where I was going to sort of set the Haiti parts of the novel. And I just fell in love with that city. City called After the Dance that's about Carnival in Jacmel. So, you know, whenever we can travel again and whenever Haiti, its political situation has hopefully shifted for the better, I would love to go back to Jacmel for Carnival and sort of get to really experience that.
Yeah, it's such a rich culture. I've never been, and this novel definitely sparked curiosity. Okay, what was your quarantine vice? Not that you had to have one, but I think a lot of us did. I certainly did. Was, you know, Netflix, ice cream, sweatpants, all of the above. What was your, I guess, you know what, I don't like the word vice. What got you through? There's no, you know, we shouldn't assign vice. Quarantine's hard enough.
I think a couple things. We have family movie night, so we had family movie night every Saturday night, and we're still doing it. That was really fun.
Oh, I love that.
And I live with my mom and my sisters and my brother-in-law and my nieces, and so my mom is a big baker, so I was not trying to do this, but she basically baked a different really great dessert every 3 days in quarantine, so that was a big fun thing to have around.
Oh yeah, awesome. Well, my answer would be very similar. Okay, last question, and this is always a fun one. I don't know. I'm curious, before I ask this, as an author, is it tempting to think how this would translate into a motion picture? I mean, I feel like that's always maybe a tempting question. But anyway, so my question to you is, who do you think would play Libertie in a motion picture?
Oh, that's such a great question.
It's a fun one.
That's really fun. I really like Jodie Turner-Smith. She's great. She's going to be in the new Anne Boleyn movie, and she was in what was that movie that came out last year? Queen and Slim.
Yep.
And she's just a really fun actress to sort of see on the screen and to sort of move around. So
awesome. All right. Well, that's all I had. This was so much fun, Kaitlyn, and thank you for sharing part of your evening with book clubs and everyone that was able to join us tonight. If you have not read this book, I can't recommend it enough. Like I said, I've got like a total, I think the word for it is maybe a book hangover. I don't know. I'm having trouble getting into a new book because I miss the characters. They're so vibrant. I miss Libertie's voice. It's so distinct. Anyways.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. This was really fun. And thank you, everyone.
This is wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the questions. See you later.
Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye.